Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com. This is Halloween Horror Month, and the horror is trying to make these videos. So I've moved on from the laptop. I am now in my studio space, which is currently untreated. I do want to do some videos that compare a treated room to an untreated room, and so that's semi-purposeful. However, unfortunately, in the move, I also managed to break my microphone stands, not one, but two of them, and so I'm just using the iMac mic right now. It's a little janky. The whole thing is janky, plus it's a mess, because I just put together the desk and everything like that. Anyway, I still want to make you a video, but if this is the first time you're tuning in, go back to some of the previous videos so you can see that the audio quality and video quality is usually much better. Alright, let's play a little bit of this record. It's coming out pretty soon and it's got a really cool vibe, so I want to break down what I'm doing in this mix and why, and then this record will be used throughout the week to point out a few other cool things. Alright, here we go.
Yeah, my chick, she's hot. The type of girl you cannot get. If you ever come around trying to shoot your shot, I'ma block it. You know the time, clock it. Wine and grind, drop it. I tried to tell that hoe, but she way too fine. Stop it.
So this is a really interesting record. It's got this very dark kind of club feel. It's got almost like a jaded feel to it. Like it's got like a very drug-induced seedy nightclub kind of like I don't give a about life anymore type of vibe to it. Like it's a weird darkness to it, even though it's not like expressly dark. So I wanted to retain some of those greasier qualities, and most of that stuff is actually in the production itself, so it wasn't too tough. But one of the key points here was the vocal. So I'm going to solo up the vocal. I'm going to take off my effects real quick. I'm going to level match just so we can kind of hear it nice and clearly. I'm going to play this through.
Yeah, my chick, she's hot. The type of girl you cannot get. If you ever come around trying to shoot your shot, I'ma block it. You know the time, clock it.
So there's a very natural sound. Like this sounds like a very human speaking voice in its nature, and I really wanted to transform that into something that felt a little bit inhuman, and there's a couple ways I could have gone. I'm not entirely sure that I picked the right one, but I kind of went in the direction of the rough mix because I liked how the rough mix was taking it. So there's two ways you could do this. One is going a very sound design kind of route to it, and I am going to show that later in the week. The other way that we can do it is by using signal processing that we typically use, but just over-processing things in a way that takes away the human quality. The big one is going to be the compression, but I'm going to start with the basic EQ here. So this is one of my favorite EQs. I pretty much use this channel strip fairly commonly these days. I really like the notch filters in general. Here you can see I'm not using any of the compression or the limiting, so this is really just for the tone shaping. I'll give you the before and after.
Yeah, my chick, she's hot. The type of girl you cannot get. If you ever come around trying to shoot your shot, I'ma block it. You know the time, clock it. Wine and grind, drop it.
So I'm really taking out all of those natural sounding room tones and just leaving that sort of flatter sounding upper mid-range and making that basically the vocal sound. Also doing a bit of high passing, bit of low passing. And then the other thing worth pointing out is that I'm also hard gating the vocal so that all of the room tone that normally decays with the vocal is getting chopped as well. That's kind of important because my next thing is going to be some very, very heavy-handed compression. And this is where things start to feel not so realistic anymore. So basically, when I do this very heavy-handed compression, if I leave the room tone, even as short as it is, in the vocal capture, it is going to bring up that natural sounding room, which is actually usually a good thing, but in this particular case, I really didn't want to have a natural sound. So let's do the before and after on that.
Yeah, my chick, she's hot. The type of girl you cannot get. If you ever come around trying to shoot your shot, I'ma block it. You know the time, clock it. Wine and grind, drop it. I tried to tell that hoe, but she way too fine. Stop it.
So what I really want to point out is that this heavy compression is bringing out the sort of mechanical quality to the delivery, and that's really what's important. It's not about how we're shaping things. It's not about how we're setting the attack and the release. It's about why we're setting the attack and the release, why we're doing as much compression as we're doing, and the goal here is to make it feel as mechanical as possible, sort of make it feel like, what's the word for it? Like it just doesn't care exactly.
Yeah, my chick, she's hot. The type of girl you cannot get. If you ever come around trying to shoot your shot, I'ma block it. You know.
All right, and we get one little resonance in here that sometimes crops up. This is really just a minor thing. Every now and then this particular frequency becomes a little bit annoying.
Yeah, my chick, she's hot. The type of girl you cannot get. If you ever come around trying to shoot your shot, I'ma block.
Nothing special there, but then the real magic here is happening in the Wave C6. This is the Too Much Limiting preset. I knew that what I wanted to do was make this vocal feel as flat and even as possible, very, very mechanical. And so I was going to use this compressor in basically the way of just like keeping every frequency band at exactly the same dynamic, which would be a completely unnatural sound. And then I went into the presets and I saw one that said Too Much Limiting, and I was like, huh, maybe this is going to save me a little time. Let's see how this feels.
Yeah, my chick, she's hot. The type of girl you cannot get. If you ever come around trying to shoot your shot, I'ma block it.
And I don't think I changed it at all, to be honest with you. I think this is exactly how the preset comes in set up. Let me switch over here and see if I can figure out where that is. Is it under vocal? I don't even remember where I found it. Yeah, Too Much Limiting. There we are. Let's see, is this exactly the same?
Yeah, my chick, she's hot. The type of girl you cannot get.
Okay, no, it's not exactly the same. I did modify it a little bit. I used it in opto mode and I changed some of the settings to get the exact feel that I wanted, but it's pretty darn close to the same settings. Mostly the gain is different, that's all.
Yeah, my chick, she's hot. The type of girl you cannot get. If you ever come around trying to shoot your shot, I'ma block it.
So that creates the initial vocal sound, and then Khan does not like to hear his vocal dry. So my first kind of instinct was to have it voiced kind of like this.
Yeah, my chick, she's hot. The type of girl you cannot get. If you ever come around trying to shoot your shot, I'ma block it.
But I just know that he doesn't really dig that. So what I wanted to do was create this kind of short reverb that had a roomish sound, but also didn't sound exactly natural. So I'm using the Valhalla Vintage Verb, and we end up with this.
Yeah, my chick, she's hot. The type of girl you cannot get. If you ever come around trying to shoot your shot, I'ma block it. You know the time, clock it. Wine and grind, drop it.
So it's like a really small, kind of like worn concrete chamber type of vibe.
Yeah, my chick, she's hot. The type of girl you cannot get. If you ever come around trying to shoot your shot, I'ma block it.
And then I wanted to make sure that I was working something a little bit surreal into the vibe of the record. So these backup vocals, I do have some very interesting effects on them. So I've got this backup vocal here.
I'ma block it, clock it, drop it.
And you can hear that I'm messing with like the formants. There's like this very bizarre kind of slappy reverb thing that's happening here. I've got this crack distortion kind of thing, which is what's giving it that weird formant quality, slightly modified. And then here, layered underneath it, I have the second set of background vocals.
I'ma block it, clock it.
And I've got those going left and right.
I'ma block it, clock it.
And I'm using this flanged verb thingy here, yep, flange verb thingy on this to kind of give it that surreal sense of space. So the backup vocals are getting a slightly more bizarre, surreal sense of space, and this allows me to keep something that feels like the reference which was, fairly natural sounding, but also incorporate some of the surreal, kind of weird, disjointed quality at the same time. And playing with that was actually quite a bit of fun.
I'ma block it. You know the time, clock it. Wine and grind, drop it. I tried to tell that hoe she.
Then I've got a second underlayer of reverb here.
The type of girl you cannot get. If you ever come around trying to shoot your shot, I'ma block it.
And I believe that's a Bricasti M7 Stone Chamber preset, slightly modified. And then it's got the quarter note kind of pump to it. Anything that has that 4 on the floor house kind of feel, I usually like to have some kind of a pumping in the reverb. Sometimes that can become a little too disjointed though, so I might smooth it over with a second reverb. And that's what I've got going on here, where I've got the Valhalla room that's kind of acting as like the actual space, and then this secondary space that's kind of acting as like the emotional space, if that makes sense.
The type of girl you cannot get. If you ever come around trying to shoot your shot, I'ma block it. You know the time, clock it. Wine and grind, drop it. I tried to
So everything else is fairly straightforward in the mix, but I think that it's worth pointing out how I'm handling the bass, because there's a lot of different ways to handle bass in low-end driven records. And actually, hey, quick plug, if you go into the description below and you click my newsletter link and you sign up for my newsletter, you are going to get a free full-length tutorial. It is all about the low end, and it's going to show you all of the different ways that you can handle the low end in order to get what you want. This is going to be one quick example of how you can handle low end, and it comes down to a very important principle, which is deciding who's going to live where. That doesn't necessarily mean that one element is going to occupy all of a certain space and the other element is not going to occupy any of it. That usually doesn't sound very good, but in this particular case, I have a kick and a bass. One is going to dominate the primary bass range, the other one is going to dominate the sub bass range, and I have to figure out which one I want.
Yeah, my chick, she's hot.
So let's take off the effects here. Now, they don't sound bad together. They actually work decently. My only complaint is that they sound a little bit flat. And when I say flat, I don't mean that pitch-wise. I mean just dynamically, they don't feel like they're completely punching through the record. They're also overlapping and scrambling the sub a little bit. So I kind of got to figure out how to get a little more dynamic into it, and also where to put the energy to make it really agree. So I'm going to throw my effects back on and give it another play real quick. And while that isn't like a massive change, you should immediately have felt the energy shift and become a lot more dynamic and exciting, and it should feel a little bit fuller. So I'm going to break down what I'm doing here. First of all, the most important thing that I'm doing is I'm making a decision. I'm deciding that the kick is going to dominate the deep sub, and that bass is going to dominate the bass range, the primary bass range that we hear. So the reason I'm doing that is kind of twofold. First is that I can. The kick has enough natural sub in it where I can allow the kick to hold down the very deep sub range. The other reason is because the melodic movement of the record is in the bass. So I want to put the energy of the bass into a higher frequency anyway, so that people can hear what the melody is doing. If the bass is living all in the sub, they're not going to be able to catch the actual melodic structure of the record as well, and that's going to ultimately inhibit how well the end listener enjoys it. So first I'm going to shape my kick here, and honestly, the kick sounds good by itself. Like, just it sounds good to begin with. These are very slight modifications to give it a little bit more presence on smaller speakers, to cut out a little bit of that tone that's happening in there, to take out a little bit of this weird knock thing, and then give it a little bit more click. So this is all very, very gentle shaping. It's not going to be a huge difference before and after. So the biggest difference you really hear is that click coming up a little bit, but also if you're listening on smaller speakers, you'll notice a little bit more presence in the kick as well. Otherwise, leaving the kick kind of alone because it sounded good to begin with, and then sending it down a sidechain path because we're going to need this. We're going to need this pretty darn soon. So most of the work is happening on the bass. The bass here, we've got a number of things going on. We've got FabFilter Pro MB, Air EQ, more EQ, Lfo Tool. All right, what is all of this stuff? Well, part of it is it's kind of my random weird train of thought. The first thing that I'm actually doing here is just this tone shaping. So I'll give you the before and after on that before anything else. So you should hear a little bit of the tone come up, particularly this sort of like metallic nose tone right there. That's the main thing that's happening in this EQ. All right, after that, we get this tilt shelf. So this tilt shelf is what's going to shift the energy from the sub into the primary bass range. That's exactly what's happening here. This tilt shelf is basically me deciding, okay, the kick goes in the low, and the bass goes in the normal low. The high low, the mid low, the low. Just the low. Yeah, you know what I'm saying. And you notice when I do that, it immediately sounds more like a lead line. Like just the melody of it pops right out real quick. So I'll bypass and play it one more time. Okay, now the next two moves are getting it out of the way of the kick. The first one is Lfo Tool, which is doing kind of a sidechain pumping type of feel, giving it a little bit of a dynamic that's sort of like sidechain compression, but it's just doing it via automation basically. So that's really subtle. You probably feel it a little bit, but it's not that much of a difference. Ultimately, it gives it a little bit of swing and a little bit of push, but it's sharing work with this. So this is going to do a couple of things. First, this is going to grab a little bit more of the actual like melodic part of the bass. If I solo this band, it sounds like this. I really like that tone. That tone band sounds super good on this bass, and so I'm just giving it a little bit of love right there. The real action, though, here is this low band. So this low band is all the deep, deep subs, like super deep subs, kind of crossing over into the natural bass range, but this here is set to duck the kick. So whenever the kick is hitting, the very, very deep subs are getting cut out, and they're getting cut out quite a bit. So that's that like 60 hertz and under stuff. I'm pulling out about 9 dB while the kick is in. So all those things are kind of adding up. Basically, they're all working toward the same goal. Getting the energy of the bass to swing a little bit more and also to focus more in that 1 to sort of 300 hertz range. And if we listen to it before and after, it sounds like, I'll keep the kick in actually so we hear the pump. So it sounds like this. And those are really the important things in this record. Everything else really is basically just level. So we'll be going through this record a little bit more in some other ways as the week progresses, but I'm going to wrap up there. I hope you dig this video. If you do, hit that like button. If you want to catch more videos like this, hit subscribe. I was even gearing up to get it right. Hit subscribe with the bell notification. Don't forget to check the description below to get your free tutorial. And lastly, you know what we say at WeissAdvice. We are musicians. Sound is our instrument. And I will catch you next time.